Sonke, you introduce yourself maybe. I'll go with Dennis.
Yes, hello everybody. My name is Dennis and I work as Director of Research and Education for Slack and Trust, same organization that Rosita is working for. And so we have, should I go into more detail or just like?
No, I think just
okay.
brief introduction. So Uday, I'm just saying the names of the people I see on video. So yes, if you could introduce yourself, Uday.
Hello, I'm Uday. I work as a training manager in a think tank with Ministry of Rural Development, Government of India. Our center's mandate, the center in which I work, mandate is, you might have heard about Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. It's one of the world's largest public employment scheme. So work in that, and I am also a contributing author to IPCC Assessment Report 6, Chapter 4, Water.
Okay, thank you. Magdalena?
Hello everybody, I'm Magdalena. I'm a student assistant at MCII and I will be your note taker for today. So.
Thank you, very useful. I see Mabusha on screen.
Hi everybody, good afternoon. I am Bashir Hussain. I'm working in National Disaster Management Fund by the Government of Pakistan. And I'm working as Manager Disaster Risk Reduction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Damita, I'm going by the names that I see now. Damita? Okay, his mic is not there, he's muted. Dominic Set.
Yeah, hi, that's me. My name is Dominic. I'm actually working together with Sönke also for MCII and UNUHS, and we are both involved in a project which is called Adaptive Social Protection, so which is pretty much looking into the macro perspective of social protection, but also then, of course, CDRFI.
Thank you very much. Evelyn, if you can hear me. Okay, she's muted as well. Martina?
Hi everyone, I'm Martina, I'm from Madagascar. I'm the capacity building officer of the project named Multi-Actor Partnership on Climate, Disaster Risk Finance and Insurance here in Madagascar, in partnership with CARE Madagascar.
Hi, okay, thank you. So there's Nora, if you can hear me.
Hi, hello. Hi, hello, this is Nora Becerra. I am working now for the project coordinating unit of the IDF, which is managed by Frankfurt School in Frankfurt.
Thank you. If I missed anyone, please feel free to introduce yourself. Your mics can be unmuted. Right, I think that's about it. We have 10 people in our group, a few silent members, but I think we can start. Sonke, should I go for the presentation? Would you like to add anything before we start?
No, I mean, first I really have to apologize. I'm not managing my camera. It worked in the morning, but I restarted the laptop 2 times and it doesn't work. Sorry for that. I think Jen framed it well. And for us, the challenge is to think about the topic we have and what are some kind of the research needs that need to be further worked on in the next years. But yeah, I'm very happy. And Rosita, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Sonke. And I think some of us will go into non-video mode as well as time progress. So it's all good. So I'll just share the screen for a bit and let me know if you can see. Okay, I hope you can see the screen. Just let me know if you can't. I can see Magdalene. If you can just give a thumbs up if you can see, that'll be great.
I can see.
Okay.
We can see it, yeah.
Okay. So I'll just give a policy them and also lack of access to climate information and data sharing mechanisms. Then restrictions to insurance transactions, distribution channels, access to reinsurers. I'm sure when I'm talking about this, you can think about the country that you are basically working on and how these relate to them. And then lack of understanding and importance of climate risk insurance among policymakers as well as other key stakeholders. and also need for comprehensive and integrated risk management plans, coordinated policies and institutional frameworks that facilitate the process, and also the engagement which is lacking between public and private sector. So this is just one of the evidence on solutions that I highlighted. Then we have the integration of macro policy solutions into national policy frameworks, which could be under two categories. One is the integration of CDRFI into national policy and plans. And the second one is the connection between national policies and international processes. So most of you work on disaster and climate change, so I'm sure you're familiar with all these. So just to give a brief idea of some of these, when we're talking about integrating CDRFI into national policy plans, we would take this process as part of building resilience and reducing climate risk, and then adapting to inevitable impacts of climate change, as well as addressing losses and damages. And then when we connect this to national, so when we connect national to international processes, we have NDCs, national determined contributions, that we focus on under the Paris Agreement. Then national adaptation plans, again under the UNFCCC process. And then we also talk about Sendai framework and also the SDGs and the 2030 agenda. So these are few options that we can focus on when we are thinking of national to international processes. So there is a case study which was also highlighted in the brief. That's on Sri Lanka, and the work that's happening in Sri Lanka has been incorporated into this. And then for those who are not very familiar with it, we have Sri Lanka, which has had a long-term interaction with risk transfer mechanisms since around 1956. And then there are relevant policies that are set up, and then legal frameworks, but still there are gaps and needs. That's where we connect with the gaps and needs for research and the coordination, as well as the capacity to interact different or engage different stakeholders in the process. More information you can refer to in the brief. And for gaps and research needs, some of the elements that were highlighted is the need for comparison of tools that are available to guide the policymakers, and then the need for guiding long-term fiscal impacts, investing in climate adaptation, and including adaptation finance solutions in the process that we are discussing. Then limited evidence on subnational level, because while we're working at national level, there's also actions that happen at the subnational level, how these could interact. Then need for more empirical evidence, and also gaps and inefficiency in insurance schemes and impacts on the insured. So these are a few things that are highlighted in the brief, but we can discuss this further in our discussion. So I hope I kept the time and I wasn't going too fast, but I think we can go into the discussion. And also Sonke and Dennis, please feel free to provide input, because you've been working on the brief as well. Sonke, would you like to add a bit also? If so, you can take the floor now.
No, thank you. I think you summarized it well. I mean, obviously, it's also important to look at some of the kind of case studies that are out there. So I think this this area very much summarizes work around, say, climate and disaster risk financing strategies on one side, but also concrete solutions. For example, I mean, probably the most cited example is the Fonden experience in Mexico, but there are also others, and they range. They're institutionalized at different levels. They might range from, say, dedicated SPVs set up as a public-private partnership, but it also might be just like a more kind of overarching strategic approach. Also, what I wanted to say, what is taken up in this group and is not so much featured in the other groups, I've read all the evidence briefs, so I know that, it's also the role of social protection approaches. The governments at the governments, they're often playing these roles also to protect their citizens. So in the reflections, I think this is something we should also pick up. What is the role of social protection? What is the knowledge state in terms of social protection approaches when it comes to disasters and disaster risk, and also what can be featured in the evidence roadmap at the end to in guiding research in this area. Dennis, do you have anything to add?
No, I would agree that Rosita gave a good overview, and I think any way to go into detail that we should leave to the discussion now. I do think that public-private partnerships are definitely something we need to look at in a bit more detail, in what areas they can be beneficial and in what ways they can be beneficial. Because I think there are areas that governments can cover very well and areas that they might need to rely on private sector to really reach that market segment. Yeah, but so I think I don't have anything to add now for the to the presentation.
Thank you, Dennis and Sonke. I will open the floor for anyone else who would like to share any inputs to the presentation or the brief that you read. If you have any inputs, is there anyone who'd like to speak? Okay, so we do not seem to have any inputs for the moment. Then I'll open the floor with a few questions. So you did give a brief introduction to yourself, but maybe we can go into a bit deeper introduction as to the work you do. And then whether you know how you want to contribute to the evidence landscape or like contribute using your work to the discussion that we're having. Would anyone like to share anything that's relevant to the presentation with regard to your work that you're doing? If so, do raise your hand, or you can just jump in and speak as well. Okay, I have a few people who are unmuting themselves. Would someone like to speak? I see WB496255. I don't know who that is, but your mic is unmuted. I'm guessing you want to speak. Okay. Anyone else who has anything that we spoke of and would like to share with us?
No, I would like to, this is Nora. I would like just to reinforce the what Dennis said, and I will be also interested to see how these public-private partnerships can be supported also from the side of the governments, because I think in the disaster risk financing, these partnerships will be very important.
Thank you, Nora, for your input. Would anyone like to share the work that you do with relation to macro policy solutions? I don't. It could be Sonke, it could be Dennis, it could be anyone to get the discussion started.
I mean, I can have a start, and maybe Dominic, you can also jump in. So at MCI, we are actually right now working on a concept called adaptive social protection. And the idea is, in a way, before the concrete type of climate and disaster risk financing instruments are actually put in place, it should follow a broader strategic approach. And it's also different government agencies that have to work together. So it is coming from the perspective of protection. It's coming from the perspective of disaster risk management. It's coming from the perspective of climate change adaptation. And so this adaptive social protection approach, we are right now working together with the government of Indonesia on this, and they have it in their midterm development planning to have an adaptive social protection strategy. It is basically an integration agenda between these different ministries and also communities and executing agencies that are behind the different ministries. So I think that would be something we are currently working on. In terms of knowledge gaps, also, and Dominic, I ask you to pitch in because we have done also systematic literature review on the topic. But what we found is that what is missing is something like it's almost a theoretical concept. And so these kind of integration frameworks, they are not necessarily concrete enough for different government actors to, and it's not only government, and I think also there are like stakeholder groups that need to be, engage on this strategy. But I mean, this different, this conceptual framework around adaptive social protection hasn't been broken down necessarily into the different elements of what it means and what needs to happen at the end of the day. And so this is something we are currently working on. We also want to publish and give to the community. Dominic, do you have some insights into the work on the systematic literature review and what you see as some of the state of the literature and some of the ongoing evidence gaps?
Yeah, sure. I mean, as you rightly mentioned, theoretical concepts in some areas like adaptive social protection, for example, are definitely still missing. And there is the urgent need, I would say, to bring this together conceptually. And to be also a bit more specific on CDRFI and also on climate risk insurance, for example, I would say that that the knowledge on the specific design and the effectiveness of intervention is still very limited. I mean, if we look at climate risk insurance, a large share of the population can't actually, or in most cases, cannot really afford such insurance schemes. So government needs to step in and maybe provide subsidies for premiums. And what we don't really know is in how far government, or there is no, again, also in the literature, there's no really an answer to the question where this money should come from and how it is best distributed. Because if you take, for example, and this is a common approach, I would say, that if you try to convert money from disaster response, so relief, aid, and recovery action, and try to move that more into the prevention in terms of subsidies, of course, in general, it sounds like a very good principle because, again, I think if we have a better preparedness, then we need less recovery and less relief. But then we also need to look at the different groups, because then still, even if you provide subsidies to different social groups, there might be still some marginalized groups that are not, due to other reasons, but also financial reasons, that are not having access to different insurance schemes. And by moving funding or financial resources from relief, that could be very risky, because then the relief is often seen to target exactly these marginalized groups, because they're often affected the most, and relief is really stepping into that. And well, long story short, I think this is really, really crucial to see in how far insurance schemes can be made ready for also targeting and accessing, or be accessible to the most vulnerable. And again, this is a huge knowledge gap that still needs to be unveiled.
Thank you, Dominic and Sonke. Dennis, would you like to go next? Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, sure. So from our work, I think that there are a couple of things we could talk about. So one thing we are doing is we're implementing an inter-resilience project on building multi-actor partnerships in Sri Lanka. And there we are looking at, regarding CDRFI. And Sri Lanka, to come back to that question that Dominic brought up about where the money is coming from, Sri Lanka has had crop insurance for a long time and has basically experimented with different ways of financing it. Through premiums from farmers directly, then basically by tying the premium payments to fertilizer subsidies. So every farmer who bought fertilizer automatically paid a certain amount of that for the insurance. And then also through a crop levy, so a 1% tax on financial institutions that goes toward the government insurance provider. But all of these, so the reason why it keeps experimenting is because none of these solutions has worked perfectly. That's why I think also one that's one reason maybe why the private sector could be important to actually solve this question. Because premiums alone might not be sufficient to finance a nationwide insurance scheme that's run by the government. And if it's just paid by taxes, that might actually take money away from other things like disaster response or other sectors that might need that money. So yeah, I think that is something that we could look at in the discussion. What is also interesting, of course, is it's 2020, so that means all the NDCs are being reviewed in Sri Lanka as well. And that's something we are also like looking at how risk transfer and disaster and climate risk financing solutions can be better integrated into NDCs and other climate policies. And yeah, I think maybe we'll talk a bit more about other stuff that we do during the discussion. But I think that's one thing to look at, where the money is coming from and what ways there are, what solutions have been found to actually finance a government scheme without overly taxing the general budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. We had a few participants from the government sector, government officers. Would you like to share your experiences or the work that's there in your countries? I think there was from India and Pakistan. Would you like to take the floor? Yes, you could speak. You need to unmute yourself.
I'm sorry, did you call for any response from me, India?
India and Pakistan, yes, whichever one first, whoever can get them. So you seem to have the mic unmuted, so you can start. Mabusha, maybe in the process, you could try to fix the mic, unmuting your mic as well. So Uday, would you like to first contribute?
By what, sorry, by what Dominic and Dennis have just shared with us on their systematic review and what they have found out, the way of utilizing the money paid by the farmers on buying fertilizers. This is a clever way of not taxing, not going overburdening them with payments and all, and also trying to figure out where else the budget is going to come from, so as to match or to support the government's, if all the government is involved. It's a very clever way, actually. I'll just throw up a little what I know about the Indian context. See, when the adaptation policy, national adaptation policies itself are in a very nascent stage in India. And the second issue here in India is agriculture is not taxable. Agricultural income is not taxable. So whatever the government contributes, it's purely a sort of a welfare oriented kind of concept. So here everybody looks up to the government as the sole entity which has to come to the rescue in the event of a disaster. There is, as far as my knowledge is concerned, so far there is I am a stand for correction. There are no private entities which go for this sort of providing insurances, because these are considered to be very extremely risky. And the second thing is, recently I have heard that Indian Meteorological Department is sharing some climatic information should anyone wants to go for use that sort of data to support their claim, requesting government to pay out some money when they have experienced some disasters. So this is what I could gather from this thing, and that's it as of now. That's it. That's all what I have to share. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. From Pakistan, would you like to add anything?
Thank you. I would like to add that in Pakistan, under disaster risk, National Disaster Risk Management Fund, we are working on national disaster risk financing component. Basically, we are still at initial stages, and we have approached under NDRMF the first analysis of disaster risk based on an identification of hazards and risk. Then subcomponent as quantification of expected costs, then prepared disaster risk management strategies based on analysis, and ultimately loss estimation curves to be used by the potential insurance industry. Then we strategies for disaster risk financing and transfer of risk. Then we are working on the instruments development and along piloting those instruments in few of the small region, like few of the most vulnerable districts. So we have synergy group, and we are just have in initial stage. At the same time, we are developing a national catastrophe model, and that is actually focusing on georeferenced exposure database for catastrophe is being developed for 4 different perils: the earthquake, flood, drought, and tropical cyclones at national and subnational levels with sufficient details. And sufficient work has been started, and soon the hazard modules and vulnerability modules will be available. Then exposure loss estimation modules would be developed based on that, and it will be eventually helping the decision makers of Pakistan to be able to quantify the total value at risk. So in this way, we are providing a base, a platform, and the requisites to the insurance industry to jump in to the risk um, transfer um, in natural hazards. So at the moment, we don't have any such mechanism. The only reliance people are relying on the government. We have social protection programs, so many programs, but most of the time, immediately government has to divert normal funding towards the response. So what we want that we should decide what risks should be retained, and what are the risks, what portion of the risk should be transferred through insurance mechanism or other catastrophe bonds or other insurance linked securities. Then what would be the roles of international donors and assistance? Currently, NDRMF is hoping that in down the line 1.5 year, we may be able to come up with the piloting of disaster risk financing instruments in Pakistan. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Would someone else like to add? I think there were some other countries in the group as well. Martina, would you like to add a bit from your country based on the work that you're doing?
I'm from the civil society, not from the government.
That's fine.
So what I can share, the CDRFI is a really new topic here in Madagascar. There are some initiatives that are starting, but until now, it is from the part of government on the first part. And in the second part, there are also some international civil society that also, like Jay said, or the World Food, International World Food, that working, that trying to set up models of micro insurance. I mean, not really macro insurance, but right now the government in Madagascar is also there is a macro insurance that is in progress. And but we still depend on international national funds for paying the insurance until now. That's all from.
Okay, thank you, Martina. If anyone else doesn't have something to add right now, maybe I could throw another question. Based on the discussions we have a few things that mark evidence on what's going on in countries. What do you see as the key challenges which relate to macro policy solutions? You have anything specific? So there's some stuff that have been already stated, like the capacity gaps and then the focus on marginalized groups not being sufficient. Would you like to share some examples of this? And if you have any solutions to address these, maybe linking up with the challenge that you focus on, connecting that solution as well. I'll keep the floor open, hoping someone would start. So what are the challenges? What are the solutions? If you have a solution to the challenge as well. I can start putting people on the spot as well. Would MCII like to start off, Dominic or Sonke? Or yes,
yeah,
Dominic.
sure.
Yes,
maybe also to reiterate on the aspect of marginalization again, I think a major challenge is the informality, because oftentimes policies only reach those that are in some kind of formal system. If you consider unemployment insurance, for example, that would refer to formal labor force, but what about the informal labor force? And I think this is a huge problem that we see, that those are often very, very hard to reach. And we see that also now with the response to the COVID pandemic, that especially in Indonesia, there are some social protection systems, so also macro policies that are adjusted to the current situation, but those are still leaving those behind that are not registered in well, formal systems, which also goes back then, of course, to data collection, because of course you have also a social registry in Indonesia, but the social registry is only covering 60% of the so-called vulnerable, or those that are based on national definitions considered as vulnerable. And I think this is also a huge challenge. So the informality and then related to that data issues.
Thank you, Dominic. Okay, Dennis.
Yes, I think that is a very good point. I think one challenge is also to include or to address the different hazards and different impacts that are there. For example, for Pakistan, I think it was mostly focused on the sudden onset impacts, but is there anything that covers a drought or even like slow impacts like sea level rise, like all these slow hazards, and then also impacts that might be difficult to assess? For example, maybe Evelyn can say some more on that if Mike is working. Migration, for example, can be caused by these impacts, but it's hard to address with an insurance scheme, I think, or with a risk transfer. But there might, like, especially if it's like informal and like cyclical migration, people going to cities during like off seasons because agriculture is not yielding enough. How do we address this in a insurance or disaster risk finance kind of solution? And I don't have a solution like for that, especially. I think what has to be done probably is to have some kind of like cross-ministerial and cross-policy coordination mechanism that addresses these impacts that otherwise get lost in the gaps between. Yeah, but I'm very happy, would be very interested in any input from any of the participants.
Thank you, Dennis. Sonke, you would like to add something? I see I'm given.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we should raise also for tomorrow and as part of the roadmap itself is clearly the role of information, climate risk information for once, but also other types of informations are a huge barrier. For example, also the kind of risk models that are available to many of these solutions, they don't cover necessarily all areas of the globe to the same extent. And I mean, this is partially a question of supply and demand, but still, I think it is a big bottleneck. Also, the question on actual household level data for many of these schemes. I know it from the German context, for example, but to have kind of recent data on, for example, all in insurance penetrations on all these lines of insurance, and that is relevant and that is the necessary information in order to also create a policy, a macro policy solution. It's not necessarily the case that this information exists. It exists in different places. It exists with, say, the private sector, but in part it's commercially sensitive information. So I think that's also a challenge that we do see. Yeah, so highlighting the role or the lack of climate information and further information that is necessary to set up some of these schemes. And then as a result, some of the solutions, they receive higher uncertainty loadings on for example, premiums if it goes that far, if it's linked to a disaster risk financing instrument, for example.
Thank you.
This is Nora again, contributing a bit to this discussion. Indeed, this data, missing data can be a problem that must be touched on, and this will also be related with the willingness of the governments to introduce these macro schemes. It seems that in many countries, as Martina mentioned also, the governments either don't have the money to pay premiums to cover the vulnerable population, or they don't have enough information to be willing to pay these kind of schemes. That in one side could be, in the beginning seems expensive, but when the hazard happens, it could be really a solution for them. So the challenge will be how to really involve the governments or motivate the governments to go into these big schemes that will protect also the large part of the population that cannot afford insurance.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to contribute?
Costa, this is Uday.
Yeah, thank you.
Hello.
Yeah, can hear you. Please go.
Hey, I have some. I wanted to share something. Okay, this might not be directly relevant. Maybe I thought it will help you. It will help us in what is setting the direction sort of thing. One thing what I have observed is in Indian context, instead of going for a new agency or a new organization which will altogether create a new insurance package, I think it might be a little bit acceptable for everyone if the insurance could be given as an add-on to the existing crop loans or any financial arrangements with any other financial institutions that people have. That's one thing what I see. So that the financial institution which is going to be a partner can also take some sort of can also contribute to a certain extent in this. And the another thing is in South Asia context, there are many social welfare programs which are already being implemented. I'm not sure about other countries, but in India there are many agriculture related programs which are given by the central government. And so this sort of any new program can be tied up with these existing programs. So that way, because a lot of people are already enrolled, so we have an idea of who the target might be. So we can easily identify the target and also customize according to the ground realities. This is another thing which I feel. And sometimes it might not hold so good if a private entity is participating in this, because in countries like India, private entities are always considered to be profit making and not welfare oriented. So the government should be a major stakeholder in this so that the people can be at rest. Otherwise, they'll think that the private companies are trying to fleece them off. So this is what I feel. Thank you.
Thank you for that input. That kind of focuses on a challenge when we're talking about public-private partnerships and the doubt about the private sector involvement. And I think also it connects with how Sri Lanka's case study was highlighting certain elements of the entry points that are there in the agriculture sector, which connects with the climate risk transfer mechanisms. Anyone else would like to add a bit on the challenges and also solutions if you have from your experience and the work you're doing? Yes, Martina.
Thank you. For Madagascar and I assume for other country in Africa, there is those part of developing partnership between government and the private sector, but also I think there is also there must be also an effort to develop the partnership internally between the institution part of the government. Because for Madagascar, for example, the government entity that manage disaster risk is different from the entity that working on climate change. So most of the time, it is difficult most of the time to create a real partnership between those parts, but I think it will be more easier to integrate and create an insurance or models of funding related to insurance if we can develop a real partnership between, for example, the Ministry of Environment that working on climate change, the Ministry of Territory that working on disaster risk management, and also the Ministry of Population that working on social protection. So out of the part that it is important to create a partnership between private and public sector, there is also a great effort to do on creating partnership between the government entity themselves. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Sanke, you've unmuted yourself, and then Mabusha is also, who would like to take the floor first?
Thank you. I would like to share a few things from my country as well. As Uday said, that we have so many social protection programs, and they are working in isolation, and there is no relation with the disaster risk reduction or something like that. So disaster risk financing, sorry. So I would say that first challenge for disaster risk financing, how to give full understanding of the concept even to the government department. So it is taking a lot of time that government entities should understand why it is necessary and how will we implement this. Then building trust among the stakeholders, that is another challenge. Then who will bear the cost, what are the cost benefit, and other what are the feasibility studies. So there are so many questions. Then technical knowledge, because this is new subject as well, and we are lacking technical knowledge about disaster risk financing. And similarly, when we go for other situation, we see that no single risk transfer instrument provides solution to all the risk layers, and to achieve ultimate fiscal and financial resilience, a set of risk transfer instruments need to be developed. And we have already fundings at national level, provincial level for this purpose with different departments. And now we are experimenting and developing this instrument with the help of Asian Development Bank funding and few other funding, donor funding. Already our country trying to start with the agriculture sector, crop insurance schemes, but people, they are not ready to pay premium. So government has to stop the schemes. Similarly, the total burden government has to bear in case of any major disaster. So at the same time, we tried during mainstreaming disaster risk reduction into development process, And we were trying that the all development funding, public sector development programs should spare 1 to 3% of their funds for all these disaster risk management programs. But due to scarcity of resources and less fiscal space, it could not be materialized. Moreover, but to introduce something, we have to have legal instruments, and we need to have regulations. So under this DRF, disaster risk financing program, we are also focusing that what are the legal arrangements are suitable to go for this program. Similarly, we want to engage private sector excessively, but as said by other participants, the private sector is focusing more on profit making. So this is another challenge as well, and how to subsidize the premium by the government, up to what extent, for how many years, are up to. So these are the main challenges for this. Let's see what's the outcome, but we are working on this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that input. I think it goes with some of the things we put in the presentation, in the slides and the brief. Sonke, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I mean, I would also ask you a few questions. And I mean, obviously, in implementing that, one needs to, in a way, demonstrate the value of these instruments moving forward. And I'm asking, do you actually have the instruments and the analysis at hand to, over time, judge, for example, the fiscal impact on these type of disasters, and then also compare that to different instruments that you have. I think this would be very powerful to bring it up also in the evidence brief, if there's like analytical pieces or lines of inquiry that you would like to see necessary for these kind of national debates to have, and if they're not there yet. That said, from my experience, especially in the macro policy space, in order to promote certain instruments, it's often important that there is already something like a good practice approach which has been tried and tested elsewhere. Even more so than maybe if we're talking about household level or meso level approaches, where it's more about piloting and thinking around that. Obviously, if you're running a country and you have to think for like the big approach, so to say, I think it's just the arguments. It's often asked like, who else is doing it? How are they doing it? What were some of the experiences? So, and to that extent, I think we actually do need to have specific also longitudinal perspectives on this. In many instances, it has taken, I think, years and sometimes even decades to actually build up the institutional setup and governance in order to have this highly specialized and sophisticated arrangements work. So I think this is something like if I can call it that way, an evidence barrier. That I'm not aware of a specific work that looked at it, and that is also kind of cross-comparing it. Also, I should say what I've observed is that there is a divide between, say, developing and developed countries in this. I've hardly seen much reference, or often I don't see so much reference between these groups yet. The challenges from a public finance perspective Obviously, they are different, very different, but there are also similar ones. And so this is something I would also want to highlight. This has been my personal experience, but maybe you also have different perspectives on it. Yeah, just as a contribution at this point in the discussion.
Thank you, Sonke. And I think that question that you threw to us is important when it comes to the evidence road mapping that's being done. So does anyone have in their country, or do you know of any work that has compared these different kinds of tools and the fiscal impacts by the use of different mechanisms and the tools that we've been referring to? If there is, would you like to add and share this information with everyone else?
Perhaps I can say something while developing the disaster risk finance strategy for my country. We have done as consultants quite a big job to analyze the gap between the expected losses and the current sources that the government has, so contingency funds and special risk management funds. And of course, we could show the government how big was the gap between the expected losses in, for example, in repair and construction, humanitarian assistance, or the need of for economic stabilization. And the gap was quite high, which helped us also to finish a relative quick strategy for the government. And now they are looking for the different mechanisms that could cover this gap.
Thank you, Nora. Anyone else who would like to add?
Well, I don't have a specific example, but I just wanted to stress that it's very important if you compare different mechanisms on their effectiveness, that you're not only comparing different economic outcomes, because I think it's very important to also consider non-economic outputs. And there, I think the whole concept of well-being plays a very important role, that you actually go beyond GDP outputs and that you go beyond, as I said, pure economic outputs. Because oftentimes the well-being of people matters a lot, and this should not be forgotten by cost-benefit analysis, which are often dominated by economic aspects.
Thank you, Dominic. From Sri Lanka's perspective, maybe I could add a bit on how the NDCs have a reflection on this in terms of the readiness plan that Sri Lanka had for implementing NDCs from 2017 to 2019. There is an NDC that focuses on calculation of losses and damages, and then also identifying participatory, I forget what is participatory, but insurance schemes, climate insurance schemes to address losses and damages. So as part of this, there has been a point linking the readiness and the implementation, where it says to evaluate the processes that are there and how it could be best implemented. So I don't think there's like a impact of all tools that are available, the mechanisms that are available, but there is a point of understanding that this needs to happen at national level. So that could be potentially an indicator of the understanding of the need, but I don't think there was an assessment done in detail evaluating all these, which can be taken as available evidence on what Sonke was asking. Anyone else who would like to add?
Swasita.
Yes.
I wanted to share it's not a direct example, but that's a public employment program called NRGA, National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. That's what a statutory act passed by the Parliament, Government of India, which guarantees 100 days of unskilled wage labor for anyone who is going to ask for it. So this has been in the offering since 2006. So in the initial periods, they were only concentrating on providing wage employment, when just asking them to do some activity just to provide employment and pay them. Later on, they shifted to focus on construction of, building assets. Assets might be communal assets or individual assets. There are certain criteria under which one becomes eligible. So why I'm mentioning is that there is a clear participatory involvement here, that the village should pass a resolution in the village local council asking for a specific asset or a specific work that has to be done under the village. So this has to be done by the local village council elected by the people, and everybody should be there. This is sort of a meeting, formal meeting. The government officials will also be there. So they will prepare a shelf of work. So whatever works could be done in that area, they all include it for the financial year, and ask the government of India to release some money. So this is one aspect. So lately there were some studies by IIED, Steinbeck, Nankikor, all these people, they try to understand how these assets are also building resilience to climate change. So they have done a few studies in different parts of the country which are prone to different disasters. Say one state is more flood prone, another state is more drought prone. So they wanted to see how this program is being accessed by the people and how it is also being helping them in building their resilience. So what they say that this program is indeed helping people build their resilience, and they have defined three resilience steps: adaptive, absorptive, and transformative resilience. And they say that in the event of a disaster, the first thing is they need to be in such a position to utilize or access this program. So there should be a ready availability of wages or money. And second thing is they should be given an option, in the sense, suppose that you're going to give a payout. So that payout should be, they should have a choice in the type of the payout. A landless person might be interested in having cash. A landed people might be interested in having in-kind support. Say he wants some machinery, or he wants to go back to cultivation, provided there is a monsoon is going on, or monsoon is yet to onset, or he might feel that if he go for a second crop or so again, then there is a chance that he could harvest it. Or if there is a farm machinery damage, or some other in-kind support. So similarly, the target. So there should be a choice on part of the participants to have what sort of payout they want. And the second thing is, when in countries where there is a multi-tier governance, in the local level, village level, there is a council, and above it there's another council, and district level, state level, and central or federal level. So a lot of people are coming into the picture, and everybody has a say in the decision-making process. So even when the local village people are quite participatory in what they want and how they are going to ask for the work, it might not translate into a reality, because many people have the power to change it or customize it according to their requirements. And say this administrative innovations also happen during the total procedure, and maybe what finally what is included in the shelf of work might not be relevant to what is required in the ground level. So this sort of governance challenges also creep in. Thank you.
Thank you there. Anyone else who would like to add before we move into another question? Sonke, I hope you got a few answers to your question. If you would like to dig a bit deeper, maybe you could have some follow-up questions as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's also a question in terms of the the impact side of things on households and what's the state of evidence there. So I do think we have quite a bit of evidence on, say, welfare impacts on, for example, cash programs and social assistance. I think that there is a lot out there. But I would still put that out to the group to reflect on it on this part. Another area which I think which is a gap. I mean, we have engaged more from a household perspective, but it certainly is a gap as well. Is also the kind of resilience contribution by this macro policy solutions. On the household levels, they are emerging frameworks, but it's still also very much emerging to see what, for example, the resilience impact of an insurance solution can be. And there are some experiences that, for example, especially in a payout situation, you would expect that you different resilience capacities can be increased. But my question is, how does this look like for the macro policy side, where, for example, it is also about the aggregate level of resilience of an entire country. Yeah, so just putting that to the group, how we go about the link to resilience and maybe also different resilience capacity. There's the braced concept, for example, on absorptive, anticipative, and adaptive capacities as a framework. But yeah, the experience of resilience capacities and whether we should specifically mention that in the evidence roadmap moving forward.
So thank you for that question. And there was some input from Mabusha in the chat box. Would you like to share what you typed or elaborate on it before we go into answering the questions, or you're okay with us moving forward? If you want, you can speak as well.
Actually, it is just the reiteration what I said, that Pakistan DRF in Pakistan, we in NDRMF, National Disaster Risk Management Fund, working on DRF instruments, and the mandate is to develop national strategy and to chalk out few instruments with the help of insurance industry, private stakeholders and government, and to come up with solutions and to just implement in pilot districts. So I just gave the introduction about that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So coming to Songke's question about household level evidence and aspects, I guess in some countries we do have different statistics that could relate to identifying risk transfer elements, right? I mean, if you're doing a risk assessment, climate risk assessment, then there would be certain indicators that could indicate the capacities and the vulnerabilities of the communities or the households. Would that be an indicator that you would be interested in terms of as you take as evidence, or are you looking at something which is expansively documented, which would target specifically climate risk transfer? I'm throwing a question at you, Sanki.
I guess adaptive capacity of a household could be taken as an indicator in this regard.
Yeah, thank you, Uday.
Instead of vulnerability, because vulnerability even among the same group living in the same village, households might be differently vulnerable because that also depends on many factors. So if we can come up with adaptive capacity of a particular household, or maybe even be it a farmer or a landless person, or some other person, who is engaged in another activity. So if that could be used as a baseline, maybe we can come up with some sort of standardization. Thank you.
Thank
I mean,
you.
I raised it as a question because I'm not aware of any example on where, say, national level indicators on relevant to adaptation on where these have been linked to these type of macro policy instruments. And so I just wanted to confirm this question, also putting maybe it to the bigger group tomorrow, whether this is an issue. I mean, obviously on the question of as part of the standard framework, we have like indicators on say loss of life, economic damage as well. So that I think is something where a link can be drawn. On that level, I think maybe something can be included. But for say a national adaptation strategy, which at the end of the day also has to include evidence on the resilience, on the state of resilience in the countries. So are there any examples where these kind of macro policy instruments have contributed to that, and where it was translated into that indicator framework? If not, then we can just move it forward also as one of the questions potentially contributing to the evidence roadmap.
Right. Just to maybe, if someone else doesn't have, I could have provide an example. So in the national communications, there is the climate risk mapping that's happening in different countries at the moment. So in Sri Lanka, they did take certain items like the losses, the hazard information as indicators for climate risk assessment. So some of this data has been taken into consideration in mapping and also identifying the adaptation interventions under the national communications. So this might be the case for Nepal as well, if I'm not mistaken. But I don't know whether they took climate insurance as an indicator, but I think some other aspects like the losses and then the adaptive capacity, that sort of aspects are taken into consideration. Yeah, that's something I would put out here. Anyone else would like to add?
Yeah, I would certainly agree that it would be very good to have this data, and that it would be good to have a mechanism to collect this data, and also for insurance specifically to get data on the capacity of households and farmers and villages to actually pay premiums and contribute to that. This is something in our insurance resilience project that we are finding out in the field survey also, like how much people would actually be willing or able to contribute. And that would be something that could be used then to develop or to refine a government-run insurance scheme. And it's definitely also true that household level data would be very good to have. For example, in some villages, there are very big difference that we found. Some people in the village have suffered from water scarcity. Other areas of the village itself had less of a problem. And then there are, like between villages, of course, large differences. So to have data broken down to that level, that would be really helpful, I think. And I think maybe some of this can come from private entities because an insurance company, for example, would collect to some extent household level data, but of course only for certain households. So how to combine this with government collected data and how to integrate into government data collection, that is certainly something we should be looking at when it comes to evidence.
I do have to say, however, that I mean, by often even by law, insurers cannot disclose this type of data. If it's, for example, policyholder data, data protection provisions might prevent them from disclosing this data. Sometimes it's also commercial sensitive data. So I think also insurance regulatory authorities need to be part of it. part of this endeavor. Otherwise, I think probably not. Probably there will be data gaps moving forward to actually make the public case for a macro policy solution. Just as a side comment.
And maybe to add on that, I think actually the data availability is not the major problem, because I mean, just sharing an example from Indonesia, there we realized that we have actually a lot of data, but the problem is that the data sits within different ministries. So as was mentioned before, some of them are working quite in a siloed approach. So you would end up with the Ministry of Social Affairs doing a social survey, the Ministry of Development doing a socio-economic survey, maybe the disaster risk management agencies doing a survey on vulnerability, but then also defining vulnerability different than as would the social protection sector, which is more related to poverty maybe. So I think the first solution for this problem is to resolve this siloed approach and to actually combine the data that you already have and that is already out there. And in Indonesia, the government is now working on a project that is called Unified Database, where they try to combine locally collected data, also sometimes on household level, but this is always aggregated. But they're trying to combine data from different spheres and try to combine them within one database that could then be used, of course, for targeting of social protection, but also then for other insurance-like solutions. And I think this is also the way forward to not only look what is there, but to look how you can best make use of what is there.
I very strongly agree with that, especially in many countries. For example, Sri Lanka, it's the case. For example, farmers in Sri Lanka often have a small amount of livestock as well. They might have a small business that they run. They might do some forestry activities, some fisheries. And all these would be distributed among different ministries or different government entities that collect data or risk assessments, maybe not in a way that then links up together. So yeah, I certainly agree with Dominic. That would be, the data might even be there, but it's not shared in the way that it's useful.
Okay, thank you everyone for the input to that question. Should we move on to a different focus and maybe see how national actions could link with international ones and whether there's scope for collaborations in the work that we're doing? So, okay, if you don't have anything specific that you want to take in your evidence road mapping, do you think we should move forward to that sort of conversation?
Yes, please. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so we mentioned a few options of taking national level actions to the international one in terms of solutions. So do you have any examples of this? I think Dennis mentioned this in Sri Lanka, how the NDCs are focusing on climate risk transfer. So in other countries, do you have examples of where NDCs, the Sendai framework related activities, SDG actions that connect with the national level actions on climate risk transfer and disaster risk transfer? If so, would you like to share with us? Anyone who would like to take the floor? So shall I ask Martina if there's anything that you would like to share from your country and how the work at national level would connect with the international actions?
Not really, because as I said before, this initiative is really new. They don't really have yet feedback on the process until now.
Right. So from India or Pakistan, any examples? Anything you'd like to share?
Yeah. A few years back, there was an exercise which an NGO tried to do. They wanted to see. They only took one social protection program and wanted to see how SDGs could be implemented through the program. Not all SDGs, whatever could be applicable to that, and they even did an exercise as to which SDGs can be covered under that, and what are the indicators and what data can be used to define the progress and this sort of thing. So what I mean to say is, in India, there's a sort of the government always tries to fit whatever is going on at the international level using those programs which are already in practice, instead of going for a new one or something. So they'll always, all social welfare programs have some political mandate behind them. So in the planning and implementation stage as well. So that they always try to portray that, so this SDG can be, we have already implemented a program which is taking care of this SDG, and these are the data, and this is how we are going to go about it. Maybe in reality that might be a different situation, but this is how the general situation works in India.
Thank you very much, Uday. Anyone else who would like to add? Mabusha, would you like to contribute, or anyone else who's willing to contribute?
Actually, we have so many studies in, but at the moment I may not be able to discuss them. A few NGOs, they are working on this, how they are being implemented, and what are the local impacts, and they are published. But at the moment I may not be able to mention, but these are available. Thank you.
Okay, Sonke, Dominic, Dennis, anyone else? I will add later once you have added anything you would like to add. So basically asking what could be the connects, if you have any country examples where there are connections between the national policies and the international processes. I believe Indonesia should be having, isn't it?
I mean, the question also can be looked at from the perspective of actually linking the instruments. For example, sovereign risk pools and taking over certain layers of risks and having national solutions that are covering other parts. My feeling for where that debate stands is, I think it has been discussed for some time. Also, especially with the Africa risk capacity, there have been some ideas on how these approaches could scale up. For example, national level social assistance systems and food assistance systems. However, I would say that still the evidence on linking these different instruments, climate and disaster risk financing instruments that are available at regional level or national level, that this is only limited. And even though from a, say, risk diversification perspective or cost perspective, it would be advantageous to do it. I think evidence around it is limited to date, but maybe others have different perspectives on this.
Thank you, Sonke. Anyone else who would like to add?
Yeah, maybe since you already talked about Sri Lanka, another example. So in Sri Lanka, in the NDCs, the commitment to climate insurance is in a separate NDC sector, a loss and damage sector. But for example, in Tanzania, another country we work with, they have both in the agriculture sector and in the livestock sector commitments to establish insurance schemes. And they have started developing a national agricultural insurance strategy that is supposed to bring like all the private sector and government stakeholders together to have this national strategy. But as far as I know, it has not been finished yet, even though I think they started with the strategy in 2016. But there's definitely like a process that's going on that is trying to connect NDC commitment to insurance to an actual strategy that will bring the different stakeholders together.
So we're focusing on insurance, but then if you go one step back, I think social protection could be something we look into as well, isn't it? Like in the concept of just transition, and then again, the public-private partnerships. I think these are going across the board in terms of implementation of SDGs at every country level, I think. Some in more detail than the others. So those could be something to look into as well when we're talking about national and international connections, I believe. Anyone else who would like to pitch any thoughts? Are we missing anything that should be discussed? Because I'm asking questions, but if you have any questions, good questions, bad questions that could connect to what we are talking today, maybe please raise the questions and we might have some good answers. Thank you, Uday, for the document shared. Okay, I think we do not have questions. So would Sonke or Dominic like to throw a few questions to the floor, and then maybe we can build on that, unless you think we have had sufficient interaction that would contribute to the evidence roadmap.
Well, I mean, I maybe again, I'm sorry for picking on you to get insights into the national context from India and Pakistan. But are there also, for example, I mean, the roadmap should also reach out to academic actors and also say funding agencies that are specifically funding academic actors. So from a, say, Pakistan perspective, do you have any ideas on how you, for example, work together with national academics to move forward the debate on climate and disaster risk finance and insurance? What are some of these concrete partnerships that you are forging? Is there anything that can also be learned at a more at a global level? What are some of also what are some of the academic capacities that you would like see strengthening in the country? Where should this take place? And do you have some inputs into that?
May I?
Yes,
Please.
Yes, we have in mind, and we in our synergy group, we are taking into account the academia and what are the possible ways to strengthen them and how to link them. We have linkages during our strategy development. We have 3 international consultants, and at the same time, we are linking with academia in few European countries and few developing countries, but yet things are on their way, and we need to do a lot of things. But in Pakistan, in universities, we are putting these questions in different fora that how to strengthen, how can we make the local solutions and regarding disaster risk financing. Basic problem that where people don't understand how why this is important to lessen the burden on government exchequers and how people can make themselves financially resilient. Because when people understand, like car insurance, it's now very common. You don't need to say that you should go for insurance. Everybody, when they buy a new car, they immediately go, most of the cases, majority go for insurance. But for other risk transfer for disasters, people are still reluctant. They don't have sufficient knowledge, or they don't have trust what the government is portraying. So the academia need to be involved. Then through the academia, we can develop a pool of experts. They can work at national level, at local level, and in this way we can achieve our targets. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, just comment on it. I think the government for sure should be risk neutral and should have that analytical view also towards future risk. But it is, I think, a challenge overall that this kind of behavioral element that people are discounting especially catastrophic risks, and these are especially the ones that where insurance solutions might help, are discounting them and risk takers when it comes to these type of risk. I think it's something which is very common to many countries, and yeah. Thank you for the comment. Are there also maybe some perspectives from India or from Madagascar on the question on how to what needs to be done in order to how you take national academic perspectives into account, and what needs to be done in order to create further capacities?
Could you kindly repeat the question, please?
So I mean, at the end of the day, the roadmap should be a strategic document which also guides some, say, international efforts or efforts generally of different people. And one of the questions is also how to engage academic actors in actually making some of these approaches reality. And so I was just asking, and we heard from Pakistan on how this worked for the Pakistan context. And I was just asking if you also have some experiences on these type of partnerships from the Indian context, and on where you see action areas that can also be taken up more broadly as part of the evidence roadmap or strategic document that IGP will publish or will be published under IGP.
What I feel is there are a lot of multinational agencies which are already working in India in this sphere, especially on climate impact and adaptation. So my guess is, should we prepare a policy document for the government of India? I guess there should be, we should try to build up a case where we can show to the government that the existing policies, existing programs and policies can be fine-tuned to include this as an add-on instead of going for a newer program. Because so once you start to propose it as a new program and new proposal, then the total bureaucracy will go into an overdrive, and they'll try to find out different permutations and combinations, and they'll drag this on forever. I mean, provided if there is a political or a legislative support or mandate, maybe it might expedite the process, but otherwise uh, it will get buried. But if we could combine this with existing policies, then it is like telling them that we just have to customize this or fine tune this, so that this could be even tried at an experimental level. So that way it could be, I think it can be possible. And we can easily find a lot of academic actors are there who are already working in this area. But in India, there's a disciplinary constraints. A lot of people, they severely stick to their disciplines, and interdisciplinary research is not very much encouraged, especially if no foreign actor or foreign agency is involved, either in the form of funding or collaboration. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Anyone else who would like to add? I think we got inputs from India and Pakistan.
Yeah, maybe I can add a bit. So for the project that we are doing in Sri Lanka, there are certainly, so we are connecting with the different universities and all the research institutions in the country. And actually a lot of them, the agriculture faculties, they have centers where they basically reach out to farmers and work with the farmers, both for the students to to gain field information and also like to do like pilot projects and stuff like that. So that I think is something that might be quite common and that can be linked to getting more evidence, also to use as a sort of source of data, and to also link to creating more awareness and trust of policies that are there and government macro schemes that are currently operating, which awareness of is not always widespread.
Thank you, Dennis. Sankif, if you do not have anything to follow up on, the answers given.
Yeah, I mean, also what I take out of this is that there are endogenous capacities, but I also do take the clue on the interdisciplinary aspect of it. I think this is something which we could probably at least consider for drafting the evidence roadmap as well. Thank you.
And also maybe looking into the network that's happening at country level, which would connect with academic institutes, and also maybe Salim's initiative with LDC universities, how their work might interlink with what you're focusing on for evidence roadmap might be good also, I think. They might have something relevant.
Thanks.
So if we do not have any further questions, or if anyone doesn't have anything specific, maybe looking at how there can be future collaborations on the work that we've discussed. Do you have some ideas, some work that you see others in the discussion could participate in and engage? That would be great to throw out right now, so we can get people engaged. Martin, I think you have certain partnerships with most of the people in this discussion. Others, would you like to share anything that's regional, international level, things that could connect to the discussion and go forward from here? Do you see any collaborations that could happen from the discussions we had today? Anything that could be further contributions to the discussion of the evidence roadmap, or case studies, maybe evidence that's available out there? Dennis, okay, Sonke, please.
Well, I mean, I think we already identified collectively some gaps. So it might just be thinking about some concrete activities that can contribute filling that. So, I mean, for example, the point on together knowing that more and more of these macro policy solutions are created, just having like some line of work that accompanies these experiences in these countries and make it available for other countries to learn. I think that's something which is very important, and which should specifically be maybe a specific work package under IGP. Yeah, just as one of the things that come out next to some of like the more general gaps that we already highlighted as part of the evidence briefs.
Thank you, Sanke. Anyone else? That from our end, I think we would be able to contribute with documents that are available for some countries that we're working on, which might have certain elements that would connect to the discussion. So as examples of certain elements, I think that could be helpful. Some countries in Africa and Asia, potentially. Yeah. So I think our discussion is coming to a slow halt at the moment. So if you have anything to add, if you would like to share anything outside the question I raised, if I have missed discussing something before we end the conversation, please raise those questions or your comments. The floor is open to you.
Yeah, it just occurred to me that I have another last question on a course-cutting theme that will be on tomorrow. And just as a reminder, tomorrow we will again meet in the big group to discuss some of the gaps that came out of the individual working groups and breakout groups, and then to basically pull it together. But sorry for picking again on in Pakistan. Tomorrow we will also discuss the gender dimension, and gender and CDRFI has this been important. How did you take this gender issue up also in the CDRFI work, if at all? And are there any evidence and knowledge barriers that you see in this specific field when it comes to macro policy solutions? And if others have perspectives on that, that would also be helpful. Maybe also if you have something from Sri Lanka or from Madagascar.
For Sri Lanka, I mean, it's not very specific for climate risk transfer, but there has been the conversation about how all NDCs could be gender responsive. And in the NDC review process, this is part of the discussion. So it would also apply to loss and damage NDCs. So there's potential for it to be incorporated through this. And then also the SDG, there's a SDG, no, what is it called? Localized SDG targets that they've developed. So there are elements of gender which goes across the board through that as well. Yeah, so there is discussion around it, but not necessarily for climate risk transfer specifically, but to policies that are climate related, disaster related. And then also these post disaster needs assessment reports have gender as a key component as well over the last few years. They have data, but the gap in data has been also highlighted multiple times, including when these climate risk maps were being developed for the national communication to the UNFCCC.
Thank you.
So for India, if they would like to add anything. I'm not sure whether Uday is on the call, but there's a request, Dennis, for material on Sri Lanka to be shared. So if you have time, maybe you could share them in the chat, a few of the policy documents that are there on the website.
Yes, absolutely. I put some links into the chat. We have a adaptation and resilience knowledge hub where we collect all the research documents and policy briefs and webinars, etc., that we do. So there's actually one on the current state of insurance, agricultural insurance in Sri Lanka. And we have a number of other ones that are related, also not only on Sri Lanka, but also on Nepal and Bangladesh. Not specifically about insurance, but about adaptation, loss and damage, NDCs, and the implementation and the existing gaps. I put some links into the chat.
Thank you. So would anyone else like to add on the gender question? Martina, do you have anything to add?
For the projects that occur right now in Madagascar, at the same time for the government part and also for the international civil society, they just consider the equality between women and men in the development of models of insurance, but there are not really specific models that are exclusive or focused only on women. but just on vulnerable people in the rural area, especially in the South Madagascar that facing drought. But they have not really a specific strategy that really focus on specific thematics on gender or on women.
Okay, thank you, Martina. Anyone else who's on the call who would like to add? Okay, Sonke, did you get the answer to the question? Do you have anything specific more than that you would like to be getting over email maybe?
No, I just wanted to quickly say this because I know it's coming up tomorrow, and if there's any specific from the like this national national level approaches perspective, but it's okay. I think we did a good job so far, and so I'm okay with how the discussion went. Thank you.
Okay, so should we call it a day then? If everyone is happy with the discussion and we kind of have all the elements that we wanted together.
I think it's good. Just asking if we can still do a quick screen share. I saw that other groups did it, and we had a little bit like the black screen syndrome. And I'm sorry that I heavily contributed to it, but I really cannot get this camera work. So can we quickly switch on the camera, those that can do it, and then we I take a screenshot just for the other groups. But I mean, if it's those that don't like it, they can of course keep it the way it is. No problem there.
So you can put a photo so that the photo will be there when you take it.
Yeah, and actually we do a recording anyway, so I can ask colleagues to just take one. Wait, just a second for me. Sorry. Okay.
So you took it or?
Yep, I took it. It looks good. Thank you very much.
So thank you everyone for the very fruitful and lively discussion, and hope to see you again tomorrow.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
everyone. See you tomorrow at the same time, same Zoom and details. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. See you all tomorrow.
Bye.
Hello, sorry. Could you log off the call? Because it's only you and me and I can't close the call if you're still on it.